Thank you for joining us on the Ultimate Leadership Podcast. And here's your host, Chris Cebollero.
It's time again for Chris Cebollero's Ultimate Leadership Podcast. I am Chad Weinstein of Ethical Leaders in Action, your guest host for the day. But fear not, the man you expected to hear from is here with me, this time in the guest seat, Mr. Chris Cebollero. We've switched seats today so that I can interview Chris on his new book, just released, Ultimate Success, Strategic Leadership Excellence. And I am so pleased to say that upon its release, this book, Ultimate Success, has gone to bestseller status on Amazon. So without further ado, let me introduce the man of the hour, your host and guest, Chris Cebollero. Hi, Chris.
Hey, I got to tell you, man, it's a difference when you're sitting on the back end. You don't have to come up with all that catchy stuff in the beginning, Chad. So you did a really great job.
Well, I struggled through, but I did my best. Thank you.
Well, it's always good to be around. I mean, just in case you had questions, I was here if you needed to ask. So, but I think you did really well, man.
Well, thank you. I also have to say, without further ado, I want to talk about your book.
Well, that'd be great. And I appreciate you doing this, Chad. I know you're busy and you've been on the show quite a bit. You know, you are a resident ethical leadership expert, and we've had some really great comments on the work that you've done here. And, you know, you actually did interview me when my first book came out, Ultimate Leadership, 10 Rules for Success. And it's good to have you back in the co-host seat.
It is a pleasure to be here. Thank you. Your first book was a great first effort, but I got to say, I like this one even more. I like the meat of it. I like the substance, your combination of sound advice and stories. I'm not just saying this. This is an extraordinarily good book, a book that I am already using and I'm eager to use with my clients as well. So tell me, what motivated you to write this book? What were your goals? What needs did you set out to fill?
Yeah, and I think that Ultimate Leadership, 10 Rules for Success, the first book, was really the rules I had to come up with in my leadership career that really kind of grew from those lessons learned and those successes and those failures. You know, rule number one is never allow your emotions to dictate your actions. You know, that was one of the things that happened to me, is I allowed my emotions to dictate my actions. And, you know, it caused me about 10 years worth of black cloud around my head, you know, throughout my leadership career. I thought that sharing those rules would really be helpful. In Ultimate Success, what I really tried to do is give the reader the skills, the knowledge, and hopefully develop the experience that they would need to develop into an ultimate success as a leader. And when you think about your leadership, are you born to be a leader or are you made to be a leader? Well, I think the answer is yes. I think leaders are born. I think all leaders are born. We have to be born, right? But I think leaders are born, but then as we grow, we're able to develop our leadership acumen as we do that. So what I wanted to be able to do was give people not only a foundational work, Chad, but I also wanted to give them something that they can reference throughout their careers to say, well, how do I coach, or how do I deal with this conflict resolution? So I really wanted to be able to develop a resource that would assist people from beginning to end in how to become an ultimate success as a leader.
So interesting. This is a book not just for people who feel like they're born leaders, but anyone who finds themselves in a position to lead. I really like the idea, yes, leaders are born and they're made. I think certainly we come with certain gifts that make it easier or harder for us to lead under certain circumstances. But anyone can develop as a leader. I mean, I'm not a great golfer, but if I took golf lessons, I would get better. If I were a great golfers practice too. And I feel like this book has something for everyone. It has something for people who already are seasoned leaders. It's also a very good first book for someone who finds themselves in a position to lead, maybe even for the first time.
Yeah, I think that you really hit the nail on the head. And, you know, when we think about leadership, Chad, and I say this all the time, you know, leadership is both an art and a science. You've got to know the science before you can paint the portrait of success, right? So when we think about the science of leadership, it's really the same. And it really comes down to the author's, the reader's interpretation of what is trying to be said and in how we interpret the science. So as a new leader, I think it gives you some core foundational areas to step into, But as an established leader, I think it's another definition of the science. It's kind of my interpretation of the science. Now, when you read it, you may say, that's a really good point, or you may say, well, that kind of goes against what I believe, and that's okay. This is my interpretation of the science, but I think what it does for you is it may polish your own leadership knowledge. It may enhance your experience, but I think what it does is it just gives another interpretation of the science.
Absolutely. I mean, I always say to my consulting clients, I reserve the right to be mistaken and still be of value. There are parts of this book that good, reasonable readers may disagree with, but even in that disagreement, it will clarify their thinking. It will allow them to formulate their perspective on the art side of things.
Yeah, I really like how you said that. I mean, it'll give them the opportunity to clarify their thinking and maybe give them the feeling that they've been on the right path this whole time. But that's even some of the things that you can discuss as well. Chad, if you're given a class and you say, in Chris Cebollero's book, he says this, but what I really think is this, I think that's really more validation of your own point. So I think that was a great thing to kind of throw in there.
Thank you. I also wonder, one of the ways that I learn about leadership is from stories of people I'll never meet. I certainly have mentors, but I also have some heroes, people who I learn from afar, maybe even from across history. So who are your heroes? Who are some of the heroes that you learn from as a leader?
Yeah, wow, what a great question. I think, of course, John Maxwell, being a member of the John Maxwell team and, being able to sit in front of John Maxwell and listen to him, give his knowledge is really interesting. When you think you know about leadership and you sit in front of John, you realize just how much you don't know about leadership. But I think that there's some great leaders in history, and I was always enamored with the people that had to go through tragedy and come out successful. Winston Churchill, Harry S. Truman, John F. Kennedy. When we think about those leaders, especially those during conflict, what did they have to go through? What was it that they had to deal with? How did they make those decisions that eventually came out the way that it did? I was talking about the Cuban Missile Crisis just the other day, and my sister is getting ready to be 70 years old. I hope she's not listening because she'll be upset if I'm sharing that information. But I asked her, I said, so what was it like going through the Cuban Missile Crisis? And for that time frame, she talks about the uncertainty of World War III. And we were really fearful of World War III. Now, as students of history, we look back on it and we say, well, that could have gone the other way. But imagine those leaders at those specific points of crisis that had to make the decisions that ensured that it came out the way that they wanted it to, because one slip of experience could have very easily turned it the other way. So I kind of look to those severe crises in history to determine how those leaders handle those situations, and I really admired that.
It also sort of keeps our challenges in perspective. You and I are unlikely to make a mistake that leads to global nuclear war.
Well, that's true. I mean, there are some times when you quabble about dinner that could really go the other way, but I think you're right.
Exactly. And so you mentioned John Maxwell, and as a member of his team, you might even consider him a mentor, someone you can learn from directly. Who are some of those people, and how do you cultivate those relationships with mentors? Who keeps you honest as a leader?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of great people, and coming from the public service realm, I mean, there were individuals that were in my chain of command that really seemed to have all the answers. And I was just impressed that, when I would come to them as a young paramedic or as a young supervisor with my heart beating 100 times a minute and, sweating because I didn't know what to do and how to handle these situations, it seems that they always had an answer. And it seems that they always knew exactly where to go with those, with things. And I was really impressed with that. And some of those folks, Ernie Rodriguez, who really kind of impacted my career earlier on, a gentleman named Randy McCarger, he really was very, very calm and resolved in his leadership approach. Jennifer Cordia was a chief nurse and a vice president of patient care services that really kind of opened my eyes to a different experience in healthcare. And then I think certainly there were folks in the military that helped as well. But my first boss when I left the military was a guy named Don Hopkins, and Don was a rural hospital president. And he's the guy who really kind of set me on the path into the private sector to say, well, this is not how we talk to people. This is not how we interact with people. This is how you need to come to this meeting. And really kind of bridged my knowledge, Chad, from a military mindset to a civilian mindset. Now, I got to tell you, I had severe challenges in transitioning from the military, but at least Don was a gentleman who gave me the opportunity to realize that I needed to change my way of thinking.
I think one of the great reasons to write a book is it's an opportunity to give a little bit of that back, maybe even to pay it forward, to share some of that great learning. I mean, clearly, even in those examples, you touched on people who taught you how to manage your emotions because they were cool in a crisis, and people who changed your perspective and made you sensitive to the different context you were working in, from military to civilian context, and people who can teach you about real subject matter expertise, people who are just masters of the technical aspect of that work. So as you sat down to write this book, I can only imagine that all of those messages were sort of swirling around in your head. What were some of the surprises that you encountered when you were writing the book? I mean, I often find that things seem really clear in my head until I try to write them down. What were some of the things that surprised you as you started to write?
Yeah, it's really interesting. And, there's a lot of the stuff that had come from my mentors that I really kind of were foundational. As a matter of fact, in one of the chapters, I talk about Matt Zavodsky, who's at MedStar in Fort Worth, Texas. And one of his best practices was whenever you came into his office, he would come from around the desk and he would sit down with you in front of his desk. And he really lived the acumen, and where I came up with this of saying that his desk is where I work, it's not where I lead from. But what really surprised me, I think, about this writing of the book is as I was putting, the thoughts down, as I was putting down the experiences, it really brought me back to the foundational practices of how I not only learned the lessons that I was sharing, but actually how it enhanced as I went along. Because, what's the one thing that you do for the first time, Chad, that you do, as an expert? And really what it is we grow and we make mistakes, and then we learn, and then we polish, and then we reflect, and then we go again, and we do the same thing until finally we get to a point of saying that, I think that this is a skill that I'm comfortable with. But as you sit down and you write those experiences, it reminds you, it kind of jars you of the foundation that got you to that point, that is allowing you now to share that wisdom. And I think that that's really kind of what were the surprises, is that, oh yeah, I remember that story. And, it kind of gives you a smile, or sometimes maybe it gives you a little shiver, and, you get to share that wisdom.
It is true. I mean, there's an act of courage and generosity in sharing the times when you really wince at thinking back. And you've put some of that in the book, and you've also put some of your successes, but also some of the other successes that you've observed along the way. And I think that what I like about this book in particular, one of the things, I guess, is it's not a how-to in the traditional sense. It establishes the framework, and then the reader can fill that in. So your third chapter is on communication. And you could write the encyclopedia of communication and not cover everything. But what you lay out is enough theoretical understanding of what happens when I try to connect with you, share my ideas with you, and have you share your ideas with me. What's going on there so that I can develop my techniques toward that? I think that really comes through, not just communication, comes through with all kinds of aspects of leadership in this book. Was that kind of what you're going for, was to get people started in developing their own success patterns?
Yeah, and I think that as you bring that up, and you were one of the reviewers of the book, Chad, and I certainly appreciated your feedback. And Chapter 3 was one of the ones that you and I had chatted about. And, when you think about communication, it's something, as you mentioned, we can give you an overview, or we can give you an encyclopedia on communication. And, one of the things that I think I wanted to do was I wanted to be able to give people enough of the information to at least get started, And then there are some chapters, though, that go a little bit more in depth. When I talk about how your subconscious mind, kind of plays tricks on you to keep you in the same old humdrum of where you are, that's nothing I could have given an overview on. I really needed to go more in depth on. There's a chapter called "You're the Visual Aid," and it really talks about your presentation skills, and not just your presentation skills when you're in front of an audience, but your presentation skills when you're running a meeting. And we don't think about our presentation skills when it comes in that informal setting as well. So I needed to be a little bit more in depth about that as well. So there are some chapters that are going to give you kind of a taste and overview. There are other chapters that are going to give you the tools from what I feel is a successful practice. And again, maybe you may see it as an overview, but it really was kind of a hodgepodge or a potpourri of information I wanted to share with you in those chapters.
It is I would say it seems like a very thoughtful collection of where you go deep and where you stay more skeletal or structural, because you're right, there's a lot of solid advice in there. And that was one of the things I did learn from the book, was remembering we are always presenting in a sense, and we also always need to be listening. So we don't get to choose what people see in our demeanor and what they don't. We don't get to pause and step out of character and act like someone else. People are making judgments about whether to follow us and whether to engage with us all the time. And so really is a reminder to be authentic, but also to be mindful and put our best foot forward.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that you got to remember is that, you and I are in the consulting world, and we're sharing our wisdom and our expertise, and we're helping other organizations, to develop into the best that they can be. But we didn't start there, and we started in as a worker, and we worked our way up to the points of being where we are today. And in our experiences of being a worker, being a supervisor, being a manager, and so on and so forth up the line, it really is that you're on stage as soon as you leave the house. I mean, I've got a good friend, Don Lundy, who says every time you leave the house, it's act one, scene one in action. And for a consultant, as soon as we walk into the organization, or as soon as we pick up that telephone, we're on stage, and they're reviewing us to make the determination if they want to engage with us. Well, your workforce is the same. They're watching every single move that you make, and they're trying to emulate it, or are you going to be a positive role model, or are they using it to point a finger at you to say, this guy or girl really doesn't know what they're doing as a leader. So when we talk about the practice of leadership, it really is important that you put yourself on the stage and realize that everything that you do, people are watching, even if you don't think that they see you, they see you.
Absolutely. One of the other very pointed pieces of advice that I got early on was, when you join a team, you got to ask yourself critically, did the morale and collective attitude and effectiveness of that team go up? Did it stay the same, or did it go down? Because we can't always affect every aspect of our team. Rarely can we affect every aspect of our team, but we can all do our part, whatever our role is. And we better make sure that we're raising the net. We're improving the average of the effectiveness and the attitude of the teams that we join.
And I think that that's really true. I mean, when you think about leadership isn't a noun. It's not achievements. It's not a position. It's not the things that you've done. Leadership is an action, and you really need to be able to develop that action every day and serve those people who are in your chain of command and your workforce to make them the very best that they can be. And that comes with a lot of practice.
Absolutely, and it comes with self-enrichment, which includes reading books like this new book. So how would you recommend people use this book for their development? Should they read it cover to cover? Should they pick and choose? What if you had, obviously people will do with it what they will, but as the author, how do you recommend people get the most out of your work?
I think there's a couple ways that you can think about it. I'm a cover-to-cover reader, and usually what I would do in my development and helping my team grow is, if there was a book that I bought, I certainly would read it and make the determination, the value in it. And as we said earlier, what did I think was, growing my knowledge? What did I think that, kind of kind of went against my, leadership philosophy. And then I would make the determination if this was something that I wanted to share with my workforce. And, we go back to, I think one of the first books I ever shared with my workforce was The 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership. And one of the things that I did is every week in our leadership meetings, towards the end, I would save 20 minutes and I would talk about, one of the chapters with my leadership team. And that went on for 21 weeks. Well, I think that you could do the same thing. This is a book that you can read as a leader. This is a book that you could read as an individual and get that foundational information out of it. And then I think you're able to share that with your workforce and maybe do a chapter at a time. Today we're going to talk about You Are the Visual Aid. Before you come to the meeting, go ahead and read that chapter. Then I want you to bring your interpretations about that chapter. What does it mean to you? How are you going to use that information? What did you agree with? All those things. And I think now you can develop a mastermind group of people who are now saying, this is what I think we should do with this reference. The other thing is I think it can be a reference. There are times when, I'm thinking about coaching or I'm thinking about whatever that is. And, just last week I went back to one of my coaching books because I have a client that is really having difficulty believing in themselves and getting to the next level. Well, I have an approach that I'm trying with them on a weekly basis, but I wanted to go back to some of my references to say, am I missing something? Is there something else I can do? So I think that that's another way you can use it. Read it yourself, use it in a group setting, help your leaders grow and kind of develop a mastermind, and then use it as a reference as you need to.
And speaking of coaching, as your listeners become your readers, are you also available to provide coaching services to people who want some one-on-one guidance, some professional services?
Yeah, I'm in the individual and executive coaching space, and that's one of my focuses of my business. And one of the things that I take is in my leadership approach to coaching is really it's for the individual. So Chad, if you and I were going to engage in a relationship as a coach, a mentor-mentee type of relationship, I would really communicate and find out who you are and find out where your leadership knowledge is, where your core knowledge is, and where your strengths and where your weaknesses. And there are some of the foundations that I would use from this book depending on your level of knowledge. And, you and I have very, very high level discussions of leadership and, best practices. And again, I bow to you and your knowledge of ethical leadership. You are one of the experts when it comes to ethical leadership, I think, in this United States. And, if I had a challenge with those areas, I'd want to be able to get you on the phone to say, what is it that I can do in these situations? But from there, I want to be able to use my core knowledge to help guide and polish you. Certainly, I'm not going to talk to you on a level of ethical leadership at the basic level. It has to be more advanced. So there is coaching that comes with the book. I'm going to go ahead and assess who you are as a leader and make the determination of how I can assist you. And then we move forward from there.
And I will say firsthand, you have been a very valuable coach and advisor to me, helping me think about the business dimensions of the work I'm doing and helping me think about being more intentional about some of the outreach and those kinds of things. So I can readily imagine, and I've seen you firsthand sort of assess where to focus and where not to. I also think that the book can make better coaches of your readers because it provides a framework for people who have a natural tendency to want to teach and support and mentor. This gives them some content that they can work with and work with their subordinates, work with their teammates to use the concepts in the book to see, hey, what fits here on our team? How do we adapt this and make it our own? But it's also really good to know that if someone gets stuck, they can also reach out, they can hire you, they can engage and develop on their own.
I think that's the things that we really try to look at. I mean, as a leader, when do you get to a point of saying, I have maxed out in my leadership knowledge? Chad, you know as well as I do, there are a lot of times there are people out there who are doing an amazing job and they're doing what they can, but at some point they reach the pinnacle of their leadership knowledge, and it's usually because of their lack of professional development, and they've kind of reached the pinnacle of their knowledge. they have to be able to recognize that maybe I'm creating a status quo rather than creating growth. And that's where a mentor comes in. That's where a coach comes in. That's where reading all these leadership references come in. I read your book on ethical leadership, and there was a great review and short stories. And one of the things that it gave me is within the stories of your book, it gave me the opportunity to think about different ways of handling those ethical situations. But now when I get into those challenging situations, I'm able to think about that reference to say, I remember I read this in Chad's book and this is what he suggested. But when you get to a point of capping your knowledge and not knowing where to go next, two things. First, you have to be able to identify that. But secondly, you've got to be able to move into the process to say, I need help. Because if you don't get that help, you're setting yourself up for failure, and you're allowing your organization to become mundane and really kind of follow the status quo.
I couldn't agree more. One of the other things I've learned from you is we have to keep developing continuously, or else, as you just said, we're establishing the status quo instead of moving forward. And sometimes people get stuck because they feel like they need someone more advanced than them to learn from, and that's not always true. Peers can learn from one another. As the proverb goes, iron sharpens iron. And so finding people you respect and admire who are at the same level of development as you can also be really valuable as an aid toward keeping you on a path toward getting sharper and sharper and sharper as a leader.
Yeah, and I think that's really a great point. And I would recommend not only people that are in your career field, but I would look for those leaders that are outside your career field as well. I mean, the way someone handles someone in the manufacturing world, is it the same in the healthcare world? Well, it may not be the same, but the practice of leadership may be the same, and the function of how they deal with the process may be the same. So find yourself those peers that are in similar positions in your career field, but don't be afraid to jump outside of your career field and develop your professional network. I mean, we got LinkedIn, and how many times have I put on there, I'm writing an article on, employee engagement. What do you think of the top 3 components to successful employee engagement? And I'm getting hundreds of people who are giving me their expertise, and I'm able now to kind of pick the things that I think are sharp and pick the things that I'm able to use. But I'm using that professional network to help polish my knowledge to put out the best products that I can make.
Absolutely. Now, as your guest host, I know that one of the things that you feel strongly about is ending on time, and we are just about out of time. Do you have any closing thoughts for future readers of Ultimate Success?
I got to tell you, I mean, I really enjoyed writing the book. And one of the things that you sit down to write a book is you just hope someone is going to be able to share in that knowledge. I got to tell you, if you're looking to grow your professional development, you guys are out there, you listen to the show. I appreciate, that every week, the comments that come in. But think about your professional development. Ultimate Success, Strategic Leadership Excellence really gives you another perspective about your leadership ability and how to move yourself forward. So if you're looking for something, this is a great gift to give to a new leader. It's a great gift to give to a peer. Think about your summer reading, and I think that you're really going to have a good time reading it. But Chad, I want to turn around to you and say another great job, my friend, and I appreciate you coming on the show and giving me an opportunity to talk about the book.
Thank you so much, Chris, for giving me the helm. I can't wait to come back and sit in that nice, comfortable guest seat that you're occupying today.
Well, let's go ahead and make sure that happens sooner rather than later. And, Chad, there are fans of you out there as well. We've gotten several folks who have talked about your appearances on the show as we broke down the ethical leadership framework. If people want to learn more about ethical leadership and they want to engage with you, what's the best way they can do that?
Thank you for asking. Our website is www.ethinact, ETHINACT.com, and our phone number is area code 651-646-1512, Ethical Leaders in Action.
Awesome. Chad, thank you again. And for everybody out there, I want to thank you for once again joining us on the Ultimate Leadership Podcast. And I do want to thank you for allowing me to join you on your professional development journey. Until next week, this is Chris Cebollero, and I look forward to chatting with everyone again real soon.
Thank you for joining us. The Ultimate Leadership Podcast is a production of ChrisCebollero.com. You can interact with us by email at ultimateleadership16@gmail.com. All rights reserved.